Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 is one of the best games on the console. It had fluid traversal, addictive combat and stealth, a story that had passion, and most of all, it was executed expertly. While I did have a fair number of criticisms towards the game, I was still excited to revisit the 3 DLC expansions released for this game that were all tied under the City That Never Sleeps saga. I went through the same motions I did when the base game released, in that whenever a new DLC was coming up, I would completely clear my schedule for that day and enjoy myself, essentially ghosting everyone until I 100% completed the expansion. I remember the expansions quite fondly, and I believe that they still hold up to this day, barring a few instances. Before I get into that though, we should discuss what makes a DLC good. DLC, or downloadable content, can be a tough subject to tackle. Some argue that expansions should be in the game from the start, and that DLCs feel like cut content that's being drip-fed to you for a price that is never comparable to the original game's price. I only feel that on occasions in which DLC is extremely short, or if data miners find that the finished portions of the DLC is within the base game. So things like paying $5 for Goro in Mortal Kombat 10 didn't sit entirely well with me. Some expansions that did sit well with me were Infamous First Light and the Batman Arkham Knight expansion pass. This was because these 2 DLCs fell under my own definitions of what makes a good DLC, which are as follows. A DLC must supplement the game. It shouldn't be something required to get a full ending or something required to get the full experience. A DLC should also be priced fairly, though that is open to interpretation. A DLC should also expand on the ideas in the base game, and I don't necessarily want it to innovate to the same level a sequel would, but rather to refine the mechanics present and offer some minor changes to the base formula. I believe that Marvel's Spider-Man Season Pass in the form of the City That Never Sleeps saga is not the perfect DLC, but it is ultimately DLC done right. Also, spoilers ahead for the base game and all the DLCs. Now, the first significant point of discussion is regarding the price point. On the PlayStation 4, the DLC runs you about 33 Canadian dollars. This price frequently goes on sale for closer to $15, but we'll use its base price point to discuss my thoughts on the value because it's the most consistent price here. The thing is, I actually don't recommend that you pay the $33 for the Season Pass. The reason for this has to do with the remaster of this game, which is where all my footage comes from. So the only way you can buy Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered for a while was through purchasing Spider-Man Miles Morales. Now, Miles Morales runs you $65, while the Digital Deluxe Edition, which includes Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, will cost an extra $25. So what would you rather pay for? A Season Pass which requires you to already own the base PS4 title and costs $35, or pay $25 for the entire game and the DLC Remastered? I think the answer is pretty obvious. If you've played the PS4 version without the DLC, then you might as well pay the extra $25 with Miles Morales for the remaster and the DLC. And if you're trying Spider-Man for the first time and don't want to sink $90 into 2 full games, then paying $50 for the remaster alone has great value. When it comes to the point of expanding upon the gameplay, I'd say that the DLC does not provide any new gameplay tools, but rather it refines the ways in which you use them. The gameplay is more challenging here, and the game encourages you to use your abilities in different ways. The story, while being interesting, does a lot to conclude and build upon some of the side plots explored in the base game. However, it gives some context to other characters that, to me, should have been in the base game. Overall, I think it's worth picking up for the price and for what it provides, and I'll discuss it further within this video. And I will be discussing the Season Pass as a whole, not necessarily as 3 individual pieces. I'll also be going on the assumption that you've already watched my video on the base game, and if you haven't, there will be a link to it down below, and there should be a card in the top right of your screen. Also, the last thing I'd like to ask is that we respect each other's opinions in the comments section. Most of you were pretty civil in the last video, and I would appreciate it if we did the same thing here. This video is all just my opinion, so if what I happen to enjoy is just not your cup of tea, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I won't sit here and act like my opinions are fact. Firstly, we should take a look at the overall gameplay changes that were made. The first notable change is with the different enemy types that are introduced. In the base game, you have your basic thugs, the demons, and then the Sable Goons. And here it's pretty much the same, however the Sable Goons are actually hammerhead thugs that have seized Sable's gear. They are generally tougher than the Sable enemies in the base game, with a few new variants mixed in too, with each episode of the saga introducing a new variant. The new mix-ups here are the shield enemies, a reworked jetpack enemy, and the minigun foes. The shield enemies were pretty basic, considering that there were shield enemies in the base game. However, these guys can now charge you, and there's actually a really neat takedown that you can perform on them if you use your finishing move as they charge towards you, though the timing is quite tight. They can also charge up at you when you're in the air, so being aware of where these guys are at all times should be your #1 priority, on top of trying to take them down as soon as possible. They aren't game-changing, but they do switch up the combat enough, and that goes for the minigun enemies too. These guys just shred your health bar and can really take a beating, and doubly so if they have the Sable armor equipped. They can be stunned by throwing objects at them, and they're vulnerable for a bit after firing their guns. The final addition to the lineup is the jetpack soldiers from the base game, though they have a twist in that they have some more attacks, but that's about it. Overall, these enemies do enough to entertain you, but they don't change the way you execute your attacks, and that's fine. There are a number of new set pieces here too, which sees you taking down foes in a museum, an underground bunker, and even a Sable barrage. They weren't brand new environments, but some of the Hammerhead bases you enter see you taking out thugs in a lounge, and it's the closest we can get to a Spider-Man bar fight, which to me is just so awesome. I also appreciated that certain abilities get shown some more love here, such as the Vent Takedown. If you remember from my video on the base game, I wondered why the Vent Takedown ability wasn't used more often, and that is completely answered here in the opening level of the heist, where you can use it quite a few times to not only take down your foes, but the vents serve as a versatile method of sneaking around. Another gameplay mix-up that this opening mission presents is when some of Hammerhead's thugs are trying to steal some art. We have to take them down before they exit, and while it isn't enough to change the entire game, it was something different which I appreciated, as it was reasonably challenging to juggle between fighting the goons in front of you and also keeping track of those trying to make a break for the exit. There's also just a few flat-out over-the-top missions here, such as when you're chasing down Sable as she pursues some of Hammerhead's thugs throughout the city. There's explosions everywhere, you're hitching rides from Sable's aircraft, and it was just pure chaotic fun. Something that also gets some more love in this expansion is the Spider Bot, which has a full mission designated to it and multiple associated crimes as well. It wasn't the most fun for sure, but crawling through a bar with this little guy was pretty fun. And a little side note, if I'm not mistaken, that is a bottle of Crown Royal. The devs at Insomniac, I must say, have mighty fine taste. There's unfortunately another MJ mission here, and while it was only used once, I did let out a bit of a sigh when it came around. I don't want it to seem like I hate these missions though, I don't. It's just underwhelming compared to the Spider-Man gameplay, which is just so damn good. Another returning feature that is present throughout the expansion is the random points in which Spider-Man exclaims that he should see what's happening in the city in between missions, and it was just such a pace killer. I understand that this is an incentive to do some side missions, but honestly, the side missions are good enough on their own to warrant playing through. We don't need an extra push like this. Fortunately, more good things return too, such as the interior and exterior parkour sections that are exemplified when we are doing things like chasing Black Cat, which just gives me some nice Spider-Man 2 vibes. I know these parkour moments are not very engaging since you just hold the R2 button, but I gotta admit, the animations for these were so good and they were always fun to perform. I also really like the Black Cat chase, specifically the part where you're moving through the tight tunnels of the train, as it was a good test of your reaction time and your mastery with the movement. The main missions themselves don't have too many differences, though there is a slightly reworked mechanic that I really enjoyed. As you work through the DLC, you'll come across points where you get to work with a partner, in this case being Black Cat or Sable. The Black Cat co-op mission sees you taking down a very large array of enemies through stealth. You make callouts to the cat and can time your takedowns with her too. It wasn't the most game-changing, as you were essentially just pressing a button to make the enemy disappear, but fun nonetheless. The other co-op scenario was a lot more fun because it saw a less hands-on approach, as you and Sable tag team a group of Magia thugs. It was a lot of fun performing takedowns while seeing Sable also kicking ass in the background, and there's even a special takedown that features both Spider-Man and Sable, but I couldn't get any footage of it, and I couldn't find any footage of it, but I swear I remember seeing it in like a Reddit post or something, so if you guys have footage of it, let me know. I spent quite a bit looking for it, and I'm starting to question if it even exists. Regardless, the overall missions here are nothing incredibly new, but there are enough mix-ups to make this DLC worthwhile in the gameplay department. It's not involved enough to warrant a sequel necessarily, but it feels like the assets and ideas of the base game have been remixed and reworked to create something fresh, which is exactly the balance the DLC needs to strike for me. There are a few boss fights in the game and they were relatively fun, even if they seem to retread some pre-established ground. The first is against Hammerhead. It seems basic on the surface, but he has a ton of Sable armor and you take him down by just beating on him and dodging his attacks. Some goons are thrown in there to add some challenge, and while it may have been very basic and almost beat for beat the Kingpin and Tombstone fights, I gotta admit I enjoyed it. It actually leaves me quite torn because I ultimately had fun, but I also would have liked something with more depth. And I say this because the next boss falls into that same criticism. Having a boss fight against Silver Sable was something I really wanted. Even if I didn't bring it up in my video, with how many times they come face to face in the game, I was just frothing at the mouth when this fight came around, and I loved it my first time through. And loved it again over a year later when getting footage for this video. My biggest issue with it is that it retreads the Taskmaster fight, where I found the best way to take care of it was through nailing a perfect dodge and returning a few right hooks. It was fun for sure, and the spectacle of it alone was enough to make it one of my favorites, but I ultimately felt that, critically speaking, it was lacking in some way. If I had to give some idea of what they could have done to improve it for me, Sable could further use her gear and tech to take you down rather than just her fists. As it stands right now though, what you see is essentially what you get, and for me, that's perfectly fine. The final boss fight is against a mecha hammerhead. And I can't believe I'm saying that. It was probably my favorite as it seemed to be the most in-depth boss fight, and I think I have to address the fact that you are fighting a half-cyborg, half-human hammerhead, and it's all very ridiculous, which to me is like, whatever. I was talking about the fight with a few friends the other day, and they felt that the fight was ridiculous and outside the realm of realism that the world had set. For me personally though, I felt it was right on the cusp, because to me, if things like Doc Ock's tentacles and things like the Vulture's wings are set up as feasible within the game, then I can buy a hammerhead that is fused with a robot body. Regardless, the fight itself was a lot of fun. It sees you just beating down on the metal head until eventually you can hold him back while Sable fires a beam at the metal plate in his head, which is the only way to defeat him. Once you do this a few times though, he activates some armor, and in order to break it, you have to throw some of Sable's bombs at him. Once you beat him down a few times, it's game over for Hammerhead, and that's the fight. It was a lot of fun in my eyes and had some added complexity that the other fights like your first encounter with Hammerhead just never really had. That doesn't mean it was perfect, but that it was a highlight for sure. So while the boss fights were nothing really special mechanically, I did enjoy them, and I think they ultimately did entertain me and challenge me a little. On top of some new boss fights and missions, we also get a few extra crimes and side quests around the city. The new crimes include one where some thugs are attempting to get inside a vehicle and we have to guard said vehicle while taking down the goons. Pretty fun, even if it is a very basic mix-up. There's a new crime where we have to use the spider bot, and again, while fun, it's ultimately The final new crime is an escort mission in which we have to watch over a convoy, taking out any ambushing enemies along the way. I like these new crimes on one hand, but on the other I don't really care if they return in future games. Much like other petty crimes in the base game, some of which appear in this expansion too, they were just something mundane to do in between the big stuff. Fortunately, if these menial tasks are just too visually boring for you, then you can use one of the many suits that each episode of the DLC offers. They were pretty good, and it still blows my mind in general how many suits are in this game and how good all of them look. The side quests in the game were pretty entertaining, however some of them are a little tough to discuss. The stolen art mission, for example, is pretty boring from a gameplay perspective, but it was enjoyable for the story, so I won't talk about them much here. Since for the aforementioned art missions and the crime scenes, they don't require any skill and rather further a character's arc or supplement the lore of the world. Fortunately, we do get some returning challenges, this time from the most annoying character in the base game, Screwball. Screwball has a few new challenges this time around, and they do a good job of expanding upon the foundations that the much more tolerable Taskmaster laid down in the base game. The first of which is a new gadget challenge, which sees you being locked to only 2 of your gadgets. These missions are not only a fun challenge as it's not just a simple defeat all the enemies task, but it also made me think about other gadgets I could combine. There's a new spin on races here too, which see you racing around and webbing up some generators causing them to explode, except they need to be destroyed in a very particular order. It was reasonably fun though. Every time you fire a gadget in the air, your momentum is completely killed, and I feel that if you were able to quick fire some gadgets while in motion, it could make these challenges much more fun. The stealth challenges are largely unchanged, but there are some new twists, like the cameras that can detect you and can be webbed up to give you some more breathing room. There are some basic challenges such as just taking out waves of enemies, but even something as basic as this gets a slight twist that actually applies to all challenges, but I haven't really brought it up yet. There's a new mechanic introduced called photobombs. Essentially, when in a challenge, there will be a certain area that contains a photobomb opportunity. If you were to complete an objective in that area, such as pass through it in a race or take out an enemy during a combat or stealth or gadget challenge within that area, a meter will appear on screen. Press the R1 button when it's close to filling up and you can score some extra points. It's basic for sure, but utilizing these photobombs will be more than essential for getting a new high score. These challenges were also far more difficult than the Taskmaster challenges in the base game, meaning I had a lot more fun with them here. When you do finish all of the challenges across the saga with a bronze or higher, you can confront Screwball and finally take her down, and my god, it was so satisfying. Spider-Man actually has some really cool commentary about Screwball, and that she isn't really a bad person, she's just addicted to all the attention she gets on the internet. And I feel like this applies to a lot of creators on this platform, in that they may do stupid stuff and potentially just do flat out shitty things, but not because they're inherently bad people, but because they get so caught up in the feeling of being wanted that they would risk the safety and well-being of other people and themselves just to feel the intoxicating attention that such actions bear. One thing I wish we had more of were races. Something as simple as swinging through rings in the air Superman 64 style would go a really long way, and I assume would be pretty easy to add in. Anyways, the Screwball challenges were really fun, even if the lovely voice actor did a great job of annoying the living hell out of me. The other major side quests are the bases around the city. There are a handful of these bases across the saga, and they have me again torn. On one hand, I can appreciate that it gives me an excuse to play around with the combat more, and it was reasonably challenging too. But on the other hand, we had so many of these bases in the base game that seeing 2 more sets of them here was just tiring. I would have much rather gotten more Screwball challenges. So those are my general thoughts on the DLC gameplay-wise, and I think we should now transition into the story aspect, as it's easily my favorite part, and I think it's the main reason that you should play this. I'll start with a summary and then give my thoughts on the plot and the characters involved after. The first episode begins with a really neat investigation board with Mary Jane commentating over the recent events, explaining that with an absence in power after the defeat of the Kingpin, the Magia, a family of gangs akin to the Mafia, are planning to make a comeback and take control of New York. Our first lead is a tip from MJ, who explains that a sought-after painting called the Maria was seized from a Magia raid. We see that someone has already broken into the art gallery and the guards have been incapacitated, but it doesn't seem like it's the typical work of the mob. Upon further investigation, we find Black Cat, who reveals that she's not there for any old painting, but rather the USB drive hidden in said painting. Supposedly, there are 5 USB drives that, when brought together, can access the combined wealth of the Magia. Black Cat further explains that she's working for Hammerhead, who wants to claim the throne that Kingpin left behind. This incites a bit of a gang war and incites Spider-Man to track down the cat again, and she reveals that the reason she's doing this is to prevent Hammerhead from killing her son. To make matters worse, due to their intimate history, the kid might belong to Peter, which could put quite the wrench in his superhero plans. After convincing her to let him help, we gather up the rest of the drives and break into the Magia vault. While in there, Black Cat reveals that the entire plot was just a lie, and that Black Cat is just trying to get some cash for herself, not Hammerhead. We find out, though, that Hammerhead already knew about this deception, and he rigs Black Cat's penthouse with explosives. As she takes the first step into said penthouse, the building goes sky high. While it is assumed that Black Cat is dead, keen viewers may notice that there is a puff of smoke right before the actual explosion at the penthouse, meaning that Black Cat likely survived. The next episode, Turf War, continues the Hammerhead plot and sees Spider-Man just days after the events of the first episode, meeting up with Captain Yuri Watanabe to perform a raid on one of the Magia houses where Hammerhead is supposedly hiding out. There's actually a short segment here where a SWAT member is wearing a Spider-Man themed watch. This guy actually dies, as was very expected, and despite this being very clear manipulation, it still kind of worked, which pisses me off. I kept thinking, I know what you guys are trying to do here, but damn, it still hits. As you work your way throughout the house, you catch up to Yuri, who in a confrontation with Hammerhead loses her men and the watch guy from earlier. And I actually really felt the scene because Yuri doesn't cry or get angry, she just drops in pure defeat. Her only objective was to protect her squad, and she failed, and this leaves her traumatized. Yuri promises to get revenge, and in the meantime, we discover Hammerhead's plot to capture the other Magia leaders and execute them on live television. He also plans to execute some sort of operation called Project Olympus. This is fortunately interrupted by Spider-Man, and after the confrontation with Hammerhead, Yuri shows up and holds a gun to Hammerhead's beautiful face. Spider-Man is able to pull the gun away right as Yuri pulls the trigger though, and she misses her shot, hitting Hammerhead's metal plate. Yuri looks back at her fellow officers and we get the credits, but the post-credits show that the pronounced dead Hammerhead was actually revived, and that's where the episode officially ends. The third and final episode, titled Silver Lining, sees the return of Silver Sable, who initially blames Spider-Man for Hammerhead's possession of her weaponry, and despite his best efforts to work with her, Sable's not very trusting of Spider-Man. After some investigating, Sable finds out that Hammerhead is meeting on top of a building downtown, and upon getting there with Sable, they're ambushed by a mecha Hammerhead. And it leads to Sable being captured, and Spider-Man is fortunately saved by Black Cat, who is at that point revealed to be alive. She gives Spider-Man a USB drive that explains how to beat Hammerhead, and then she just kinda goes away. We rescue Sable and finally gain her trust, and when we catch a ride to Sable's sea base where we attach a huge laser to her aircraft, we get ambushed by Hammerhead. We take him down, and that's pretty much where the saga ends. So overall, I really liked the story presented here, as it explained a lot of the unfinished arcs of the base game and did it so well that I argue this DLC is borderline essential to experiencing the entire Spider-Man PS4 storyline. Black Cat was a character that I really wanted more of in the base game, and having her play a role in this story was really good, and I appreciate the plotline with her son, as it made me look at Peter and Miles' relationship from a different angle. I was trying to imagine what it would be if Peter did have a kid, and he continues to explain how he isn't ready and he doesn't think he would even be a good dad. It's funny though, because Peter fathers Miles so much throughout the game and says these stereotypical parent lines like, "What am I gonna do with him?" And he even gives a classic condescending tone.
Miles, you can't be doing stuff like that.
I know that now.
I'm serious.
Peter seamlessly fills the void left by Jefferson Davis and acts as both Miles' hero and mentor. Their many phone calls throughout the game strengthen their relationship as Miles admits to jumping off a bridge and breaking his toe. Peter also gives this really fun tidbit about swinging.
Why are you making me do physics and calculus equations? Shouldn't I be practicing with web shooters and gadgets and stuff?
Okay, quiz time. If a pendulum is 40 meters long and attached at a 45-degree angle, how far will the pendulum fall at its lowest point?
11.72 meters. But why does that matter?
It matters a lot if you're the pendulum.
What? Oh! Wait, so you do all these equations in your head like while you're swinging through the city?
I have to. And so will you if you want to get good at it.
Their relationship is expanded upon greatly, and it leads into Miles Morales really well. I also really like the way Spider-Man used fear in this scene in which he just stares down a Magia thug to make him talk. It was so easily badass and humorous at the same time. Black Cat's character was handled very well, and I appreciate her introduction the most. The very first time we see her, she's in a tree, and her lie to Spider-Man paints her as being someone who needs to be saved. She's caught in the Magia crime family, and this is reflected by her introduction because she's a cat, stuck in a tree. A family tree. A Magia family tree, yeah? A situation I'm sure the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would be all too familiar with. I just can't help but feel that this cat stuck in a tree symbolism is intentional. Though according to Nam's Compendium, I'm reaching like Michael Jordan in Space Jam. The side quest with Black Cat's father was good lore too, since it gives us some background on the Black Cat and Spider-Man's relationship, as he explains that they train together, and it also gives us an idea as to where Black Cat gets her deceptive tendencies from. Yuri's character in the DLC gets a fair bit of attention too, and her transition from a hero into an anti-hero is well executed and well justified. The side quest tied to Yuri sees you visiting a bunch of crime scenes that have been committed by a Magia hitman, and each crime scene has a recording which recounts said Magia hitman's sessions, and in those sessions he asks that the therapist record Yuri's appointments. It gets a little confusing, but essentially both Yuri and the therapist are undercover and trying to take down the Magia hitman, but the hitman gets wise to it and kills the therapist in cold blood. This sends Yuri over the edge, and the final crime scene showcases the murder of said hitman, which was actually committed by Yuri. She calls Spider-Man and explains that the system doesn't provide actual justice, but her method of killing these people actually betters society. It conflicts with Spider-Man's thoughts of wanting to give everyone the chance to change, but for me personally, I agree with Yuri's decision. I think it's justified to just eliminate someone who won't be rehabilitated by the system and someone who has supposedly killed 10 people or more. I like that the game does a decent job of presenting these two ideologies, and while not giving an answer necessarily to which one is right, I don't really think there is a right answer. Sable got a little more attention here, and for good reason, as her character is not as simple as presented in the base game. She shows up in a very aggressive manner, and it's assumed that this aggression is from the anger and frustration of having her tech stolen. As the saga goes on, though, we find out that the reason she is so frustrated is because her attention is being drawn away from the ensuing war taking place in her home country of Symkaria. We see that once she trusts Spider-Man, she shows her fun side a little bit too, and I believe that her story isn't really finished here. I think Sable is almost guaranteed to show up in a sequel, and this DLC did exactly what it needed to set up her motivations and her relationship with Spider-Man. Hammerhead was, fine. I mean, he was just a basic villain who wanted power and money. He doesn't stack up well against the villains from the base game, though, because his motivations are just purely power. Doc Ock was destroying the city for revenge, the Vulture was helping so that he could find a cure for cancer. On top of that, there were just other villains I would not have minded seeing. Like, you know who we need? The Spot. For real though, I thought Hammerhead was just whatever, but that's fine because the real stars here are the supporting characters. The funny thing is though, it is kind of where this DLC falls short for me. My own definition of what a good DLC is that it's not mandatory to get the full experience from the game. The issue here is that this DLC is so well done in my eyes, and that its story does so much to wrap up the plotlines of the base game and set up plotlines for the next entry, Miles Morales, that I'd argue this DLC is mandatory to get the full experience. I think this is lessened by the fact that it's included with the remaster, which is quite fairly priced, and ultimately I enjoyed this so much. It took a lot of features and elements from the base game and expanded upon them and remixed them to give an experience that, while not feeling like sequel material, feels like a true continuation of the base game story. I think it goes without saying that both the remaster and this DLC are worth your time and worth picking up, as it ticks off nearly every box for me, and I believe that ultimately it is DLC done right. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit. I just want to say thanks to the gold tier patrons, Bossian22, Christopher Moreno, Francis Pop, Mario Nate, and Pyrite. I want to say thank you to the silver tier patrons, Chiefy, Dr. Nannard, Gonzo Gonzalez, and Jacob Douglas, and our bronze boys, Denzel, Ritesh, Nathan Figs, Over the East, and Elfhednar845. Thank you so much for your continued support. I just wanted to say that as of recording this, I obviously have just finished editing the Spider-Man video, and I actually, this is being recorded like a few weeks, like at least 1 or 2 weeks before this video's release. After making this video, I realized that I feel like my videos are becoming very repetitive, and I'm not happy about that. I just felt like not that I don't have passion, but I feel like I'm going through the motions all the same. I keep talking about the presentation, gameplay, story, and it's becoming too stilted, I think. Yeah, but I just feel like these last couple of videos have not been... It's not that they haven't been good. They've been okay, and I think that's the issue, is it's been since my infamous 2 video, borderline the Honey Pot video, where I've said to myself, like, that was a very good video. Like, I want to be able to finish a review, look back, and be like, that was excellent. And you can't do that with every video, obviously. Like, there's going to be some like this one, where I talk about a DLC, and it's like, just the subject matter alone isn't very interesting, so there's not a ton I can work with. And so rather than continuing to stay inside this kind of format that I'm doing right now, where I bounce between like Arkham, Spider-Man, Assassin's Creed, Infamous, I think I'm going to try and branch out more into just stuff that has really been grabbing me. Like, I've really wanted to make a video on Sleeping Dogs for a while, and so that's kind of where my main focus is right now. I've put the Infamous Festival of Blood script just on the back burner, because I was thinking, like, you know what, I'm not in an Infamous mood, and so I'm just going to leave it. And yeah, I'm sorry if this sounds kind of convoluted. I am just rambling. That's basically all I got to say. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments, just about, like, you know, do you agree, disagree, yada yada, let me know. And I will talk to you all in the next video. Take care.